How are we all? This is going to fall over. Okay, so members, welcome to tonight's Licensing Appeals Committee. Just some emergency evacuation announcement. There's no planned fire drills, so if the alarm activates, please leave the building in an orderly fashion via the nearest fire exits, which are here or right behind you. Fire assembly points in the island in front of the main building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings, and please do not return to the building until you're given permission to do so by council staff. Please also note the meeting will be audio recorded. As usual, please make sure that all your mobiles are either switched off or put to silent. I appreciate it. I'll do it myself, actually. Okay. There's no filming, is there? Right, members, as usual, now there is a need to use microphones during the meeting, so when I invite you to speak, could you please wait until there's a microphone free in front of you? And have you all got, I can notice there's one there. Are there enough? Okay, good. Okay. Before speaking, so the microphones are needed for the hearing loop and also for the audio recording. These are all switched on and ready to use, so please just speak and they'll be unmuted by the officers behind me. Please make sure the microphone is close to your mouth before speaking. Speak clearly. Members, voting will be done on a show of hands in line with the Constitution. I will ask for a show of hands for and then against recommendations. We will also ask for a show of hands for those wishing to abstain from voting, should there be any. Okay, item 1 is apologies for absence. We received apologies from Councillor Mrs Squires-Coleman and also Councillor Michael Hoy and Councillor Sharp. Agenda item 2, substitute members. I'm aware, Councillor Stanley, you're substituting for Councillor Sharp, is that correct? Thank you. Okay. And if Councillor Reeves makes it, then he's substituting as well. But okay, item number 3, non-members attending. I have none notified, I don't see any around. Thank you. Item number 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of July 22. They've been circulated, members. Has everybody had a chance to read them? Do you all agree that they are accurate representation of that meeting? Anyone against? Okay, I'll take that as agreed. Sure, thanks. Okay, item number 5 is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, members? Okay, thank you, sir. Item number 6 is a summary of the report, the effectiveness of the Earn As You Learn scheme. Member Stephen Greener, Principal Licensing Officer, will introduce the report. Mr. Greener, thank you.
Good evening, and thank you very much. Oh, got a little bit loud there. I have produced the report, and I apologise, I will highlight it early on. There is a typing error at 2.4, where I have put 2016 instead of 2026. So I apologise for that one. It is quite a lengthy report. There's lots of facts, figures, information. I think it's about 14 pages of information. Quite a lot to digest and take in. So what I have done is you also on your tables have got a copy of a summary presentation, which is just outlining the key sort of points that are in the report, and I will go through them. I have also put it on the main screen, so hopefully that people can see that at the same time. So the purpose of the report is to review the effectiveness of the Earn As You Learn scheme, which was implemented in January 2022. The aim of the scheme was to increase the number of licensed drivers within the district whilst maintaining the high standards required to obtain a licence. I believe a lot of people were here on that decision. We highlighted that during COVID we lost a lot of drivers, and we were seeing that there was a high demand for the taxi trade, and unfortunately we couldn't supply the numbers of drivers compared to the demand, and we were concerned around some people having to wait up to 2 hours to get home in a taxi. So we introduced the scheme, obviously with your support. So as I've already mentioned, On the 18th of January 2022, the Licensing and Appeals Committee approved the introduction of the Earn As You Learn scheme. The main purpose of the scheme, I think it's quite important we go back to the original purpose to help with the evaluation of the effectiveness of the scheme. First of all, there was a national shortage of drivers since the pandemic. Existing drivers have changed their work patterns. This has impacted on the availability, certainly on a Friday and Saturday night. And the trade felt that the current requirements in place to obtain a Hackney Carriage driver's badge took too long, as this could take up to 6 months to go through the process. So, what did we introduce? As part of the scheme, we broke it down into 2 sections. First, the responsibility of the drivers, and then as the operators. First of all, as the drivers, they'll be issued with a badge once they've completed all the appropriate aspects except for the knowledge test. They'll be issued with a private hire driver's badge for 9 months, and they must pass the knowledge test within 9 months. Failure to pass the knowledge test will result in the driver's badge lapsing, and they would not allow to be reapply again within 12 months of the conclusion of the expiry of the badge. In relation to the operator, they would take on the role as a mentoring scheme, and they would work with the drivers, and it would only be with one of the 4 main operators that we have within the district. They are Andrews, Bestax, 24/7 and Alpine. They must ensure they are assigned to work solely within the Rochford district and not subcontracted to operate outside the district. The Earn As You Learn badge will place a requirement on the operators to work with the licence holder to encourage them to obtain their full badge. Any concerns relating to a driver must be reported to the licensing team immediately, and will ensure that Earn As You Learn drivers will only drive private hire vehicles and can only work on pre-arranged bookings. And they will help the drivers by means of financial support and assistance with their knowledge tests. Okay, so we've got some baseline information for you. First of all is, what do we compare with England and outside London back in 2015, so pre-pandemic, and then in 2022 when we introduced the scheme. So for private hire drivers across England, outside London, they had 85,000 drivers, and that increased to 114,200 drivers, which was an increase of 26%. Rochford, we had 94 drivers in 2015, and then we had 136 in 2022, but this was actually impacted by the amount of school contract providers that we had at the time. We had a lot of school contracts that left Southend and then came to Rochford. In relation to private hire vehicles in England, again in 2015 they had 95,500, and in 22 they had 122,000. So they saw an increase of 21.8%, whereas in Rochford we had 57, and then we reduced to 49. So we actually saw a reduction compared to the rest of the UK. Hackney Carriage drivers, this is the real sort of big bit for us. In 2015, there was 27,100 drivers across the UK, outside London, and in 2022, there was 71,700, and there was a slight difference or reduction of 0.56%. However, Rochford was very different. We had 258 drivers. In 2022, we reduced down to 207, which was a 19.9% reduction. Sorry. Question?
Councillor Cross.
Thank you. Can I just clarify the start of the scheme? Clearly it was approved in January 2022. When did it actually start? And do these 2022 figures here, are they after the scheme started or before?
This was prior to the scheme starting. And it was about, I'm trying to think actually, I think it was about 3 weeks later that we had the scheme up and running. So we turned it around very quickly to get it up and running. Certainly in February we were up and running.
Thank you.
Okay, and then in relation to Hackney Carriage vehicles, again, you can see there that Rochford, I'll jump to this bit because it's quite long. We had 226 vehicles, and then in 2022 we dropped down to 130 vehicles. So we saw a 51% reduction in Hackney carriage vehicles just in that short period of time. So we've got some information as to most up to date. I did it up until the 18th of January, which is effectively 12 months exactly from the date that we had the original meeting. We have got 189 taxi drivers. We have 40 Earn As You Learn drivers, so potential Hackney carriage drivers. And we've got 114 private hire drivers, which obviously includes the school contract providers. So in total, we're at 343. If you have a look compared to January in 2022 in relation to Hackney carriage drivers, we've actually lost more Hackney carriage drivers since we had the initial meeting last year. Yes.
Chair, shall I ask a question?
Yeah, Councillor Lefter, yeah.
With the school contract hire, they don't pick up on weekends and stuff. They just do the school contract. So they are for hire vehicles, but not for hire vehicles.
Absolutely, yes. These are specifically contracted drivers to go and work with the schools, to work during the week only with the school pickup and drop off. They don't do any other work apart from that.
And how many of those are there? Do we know offhand? If
No.
not, don't worry.
I'm sure if we can look it up for you. I think it's a fair few. We've got quite a lot because we took on a lot from Vectio that was originally Southend and that are then licensed with us. But I'll ask Karis to look those figures up for you. Is that all right? I prepped for everything else apart from that one. So that gives us a sort of a baseline as where we are around the numbers. But it's not all just about baseline numbers. I wanted to also get the views of the people that were going through the scheme themselves, the Earn As You Learn drivers. And I sent out a survey out to all the 40 drivers that are on the Earn As You Learn scheme. I specifically told them I wasn't going to ask their name. I didn't want to know their details. All I wanted to know was what operator they worked for. And then there was another number of other questions, such as the times that they worked, days of the week. So they felt comfortable to fill it out accurately rather than what we wanted to hear as such. So 71.4% of the people responded completed the survey for me. 57.1% of those worked for Andrews and 42.9% worked for Best Tax. They are the two main operators that took advantage of the scheme. 35.7% of the responders had held a licence between 3 and 6 months, and 46.2% had attended a knowledge school at least once a week or more. Unfortunately, this is the little bit that is concerning. 30.8% of them at the time said that they've never been to the knowledge school, even though that obviously was one of our requirements that we asked for. And 85.7% of them felt that the council should continue with the Earn As You Learn scheme. So they obviously felt that it was quite good. Right, I've got lots of hands now.
I beg your pardon, oh, my word. Right, forgive me, members, without seeing the order in which your hands went up. Do you mind if I start from left to right? Councillor Mrs McPherson.
Thank you, Chairman. The 30%, 30.8% that have never been to a knowledge school. I wonder if you know anything behind that, as in, did some intend to do this just for the 9 months and not actually do the knowledge test?
I have spoken to the training schools around it. Some of them, well, one of the knowledge schools particularly, and you'll see this in the stats a little bit later on, found that they were struggling to get the people in because they were trying to earn the money first and then were worrying about passing the knowledge test at a later stage. What they thought that they could do was work, certainly for the first few months, build up some money and then attend the knowledge school. and then obviously cram it in right at the last minute before the deadline. And that was fed back to us via the Knowledge School. One of the other Knowledge School has operated completely differently. As part of their hire agreement, they had to attend, or the agreement they had as part of the scheme, they had to attend weekly. They didn't have any option. So 2 operators ran the scheme very differently, and you will see that in the figures as we go further through.
And I expect one of those is more preferable, the way that it was ran.
Yes.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. We've got some lovely percentages here, but you haven't told us what the total is. How many responded?
Okay. It was... I will look up those exact numbers for you. Like I say, 71% of them replied. I'll look it up. I've got it on a...
It's just that 71% of 100 is different to 71%.
No,
of
71%
10,
of 40 drivers.
Yes, I know it's 40,
so
but
I will quickly work out my maths.
I don't know if they... well, no, did all 40 respond?
No, not all 40
then
responded.
we need to know the number to show the relevance of the statistics. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Steve, when this, with going what Councillor McPherson said, that 30.8%, and you don't know who they are, as you've stated, and you didn't want to know how are you going to make sure they do this knowledge test?
We specifically asked them as to what operator they worked for, and I can go back through the individual responses to see what I could look at what school that they were working with, and I did actually raise it. It was 90% all the same operator. So I was able to then speak to the operator to say, what are you doing to address it?
Right, okay.
My
Councillor
question has been answered.
Yeah, I think mine has as well.
Good evening.
Evening.
I noticed that there's 40 additional drivers, and yet, again, there's 30% have never been to a knowledge school. 40 drivers out of 40 drivers. This is crazy. It really is. And to see that they've got 35% have held the badge for 3 to 6 months. There's a big difference here, isn't there?
Yeah, when we ran the scheme, we wanted to obviously allow them the 9 months sort of period for them to learn the knowledge. I think in hindsight, when we set up the scheme, we should have put something in place with the operators that said the drivers must attend weekly. And I think that's a learning curve for us. It was a new scheme that hasn't been tested anywhere else. And I think that's the advantage, obviously, of today, is we can look at what has worked, what hasn't worked, and then you can then determine as to the way forward. That may certainly be something that you might want to consider if, I can't preempt, but if you decide the scheme to continue, that may be a requirement that you want in there with the knowledge schools.
Was only 40 drivers applied to
Yes.
There was only 40?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Steve, before you continue, can I just confirm that what you're saying here is these figures, so it's 30.8% of not, it's actually 30.8% of 71.4% of all the drivers.
Yes.
As opposed to 30.8% of 40.
Yes.
Right, that's the first thing. And secondly, without trying to preempt what you're coming on to, because I've been writing several things down, are you going to elaborate a bit more on the fact that these people haven't been to, I don't want to jump the gun here, you are right, I'll let you carry on then, thank you.
No, that's okay. Like I say, it's useful if they have got any sort of questions, and please obviously do throw them at us, and we'll go through them one at a time. As I said, one of the questions that I asked was what times do you tend to work? Again, as part of the original sort of agreement was that it was predominantly Friday and Saturday nights. Late at night was obviously a concern for us. But if you have a look at the chart in the yellow, it shows that certainly on the Friday and Saturday nights, the most regular time they work is between 6 and 10 o'clock at night, rather than what we originally asked for, which would be ideally the 10 o'clock until 5 a.m. sort of time. So that certainly has been fed back to us from the drivers. if you look at the next question that I asked, which was, where would you say that the majority of your work is located? And again, I refer you to the very tall dark maroon column that indicates that a lot of their work actually is in the Southend area. That obviously that gave us some concerns as well, but there is sort of a strong area in the red area for Rayleigh and for Rochard also during the evenings as well. Okay, key question that I felt was important is, as an Earn As You Learn driver, how confident are you that you think you're going to pass that knowledge test in 9 months? 1 being very confident, and 5 being, no, not confident at all, I'm really worried. I would say that some, I think, are from a certain knowledge school that are very confident, and unfortunately, if you look at column 4 and column 5, there is quite a high percentage that have indicated that they're not confident that they're going to pass that knowledge test. I don't know whether that's because it was early on in their process that they were in the early stages of going through the badge and just driving and learning, but there was a clear sort of separation between the two. I can tell you the majority of the ones that were very confident was working for 1 operator.
Councillor Efty.
Probably going to ask another question you're not going to know the answer to. As they haven't got the knowledge and they're learning the knowledge, what, are they using sat-navs to get around at the moment?
Yes, because they know exactly where they're picking up and dropping off. They are able to use sat-navs. As part of the scheme, what we did also introduce, and I brought one with me, is around feedback. We were really, really keen on getting some feedback to see how the Earn As You Learn scheme was operating and what we introduced. And since then, we've not only done it for our Earn As You Learn drivers, but we've done it now for everyone else as well, is we've put a headrest band in the back of every single vehicle, and it says, how did I do? In the middle is the plate number of the vehicle, and they can either scan a QR code if they've got a technical phone, or if not, we kept the web address really, really short. That takes you directly to a form that's on the Rochard Council website, and we ask that question, how did you find the driver, the journey, have you got any concerns, and that information gets back directly to us. We've had lots and lots of feedback that has been submitted, which is really, really positive. I'm pleased to say we've only had 1 person that's come back to say any negative over the entire 12 months. So that's really, really good that we were able to get the information directly rather than relying on the operators from telling us what we wanted to hear. So certainly, we've not had any concerns that have been raised to us about people not knowing where to go, or the driver being unsure because they've been able to use their mobile phones for the sat-nav sort of facility. I know there's questions.
Yeah, Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask, as it is a prerequisite that they can only use pre-booked fares, how is that enforced? Is the onus on the operator to ensure that that's what happens?
Yes, under the legislation, under the operator's licence, they can only deploy vehicles that are approved under their operator's licence. So the vehicles will be assigned to their computer system. They will then send the jobs out to the drivers at the vehicles of the place to pick up and where to drop off, and so they control it.
Is there any possibility that they could take additional fares sort of on the way?
No, if that happens, then they're breaching legislation and we would revoke their licences immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. This knowledge that they are, it looks very much like 50% are not confident in what they're doing, and they're using sat-nav. It's a bit, they won't pass if they use a sat-nav. That's for sure.
That's correct.
Sat-nav is not a good idea in any case. With that in mind, and the 40 that have applied for it, basically you're looking at half to get through this knowledge. Is that going to be, is there any more take-up than those 40 since in halfway through this experiment that we're dealing with to accommodate those extra 20 or more to go through it? And where we've got, it says 50% are confident in passing, is there an interim exam, if you like, or a test, an interim test, just to give them that little bit of knowledge? Because 50% are not confident. So I feel that there should be some intervening program to test them in say 3 months or 4 months, that sort of thing. So to make life, to give us confidence that this is, because I don't feel as though this is working very well if you've got 50% that won't pass.
Okay. We have got the up-to-date figures because we preempted that was going to be asked today. We have currently got, as of today, 43 Earn As You Learn drivers working at the present time. We've got, in addition to that, we've got 9 that have actually passed their full process and passed their knowledge test. And we have got 12 applications that are currently going through the stages at the moment in preparation to issue their Earn As You Learn badge. So that's 64 in total as of today. In relation to about knowledge, the knowledge schools issue out modules at a time to learn the district, because there's a lot of the roads in the district to learn. The way that we do the knowledge test, it is a computer-based test, so it's multiple choice. We don't know what the questions are going to be. We've uploaded thousands and thousands of roads into the system, so it could be absolutely any road in the district that could be chosen, and then we ask what is at either end of that road. Even whether it's a lake or if it's a dead end, we ask those sort of questions. The knowledge test is not easy. It is very, very difficult to get through. I know that we had the discussion here before as to whether it is the knowledge test worth keeping. I think so. It shows dedication for them to actually know the area. Like you say, a sat-nav doesn't always give them the best route or the right route. So you do need the actual knowledge at the same time. So, like I say, the knowledge schools do work closely with them. And like I say, they won't give out the next module until they're ready and they feel confident. Like I say, one of the knowledge school is working very, very well. Like I say, and as we go through, you'll find that one of the other knowledge schools isn't working as well as we would like. And that will be part of, obviously, for your discussions for yourselves.
Sorry, Steve, just before I come to yourself, Councillor Mrs Mason, can I just point out that as we go through this, it's quite clear that there's a number of questions coming up and concerns. If it turns out, as a committee, we decide that we want to keep the scheme, we are able to add recommendations, a bit like we do on overrun scrutiny. So I don't know if that's an option you may want to consider. Had you finished?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Yes, thank you. You'll be aware of this because I emailed earlier that I have some concerns. One of them, which has come up now, so I'll raise it now, is the fact that we say they must ensure they're working solely within the Rochford district, and all the information we've got makes it quite clear they're not operating solely within the Rochford district. So 6.2 and 6.6 are a contradiction, and I have asked for some clarity. But I think we have some concerns. We've got concerns, I've heard about the knowledge, concerns about the pick-up point, and concerns about the number. And forgive me, but I think it would be helpful if we heard the whole of the presentation, and then if we decide as a committee that we want to go ahead with this, perhaps look at the specific areas of concern and see how they can be well addressed if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
No, that had crossed my mind. I wasn't expecting, the reason I had my head down actually earlier was I wasn't expecting questions so early, but I am conscious that there's a lot of information here, and by the time we get to the end of it, your questions may be forgotten. And so that's why I've sort of done it, but you know, if we can let Steve go on, then that really, and I do agree with you, Councillor Mr Mason. Councillor Mr McPherson.
I'll try and keep this brief. On your graph, when you asked whether they're confident or not confident, obviously you've asked that at a certain time, so some of them may not have even engaged with the Knowledge School, so that's going to reflect in there. Quite clearly, there's some direction here when we're looking at the recommendations about them starting that Knowledge School early and possibly the weekly sessions. And also on your chart where you showed their time spent in Southend, my understanding is the knowledge that they learn is of our district, not of Southend. And you mentioned that you had some concerns around that. Are you going to bring that up further on in this?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, I'll raise that because again, it was part of the original agreement was that they solely worked in the Rochford area.
Yep.
And like I say, information from the drivers have clearly indicated that that didn't happen.
Okay, wonderful. And yes, Chairman, I will keep everything to the end now because that makes perfect sense.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Lambourne, if it's brief, then we'll let Mr Greener continue.
On the out of area bars on the where do you earn your money, are we saying that that work is solely in Southend or Castle Point, or is it that somebody is in Castle Point and they want to come to Rayleigh, or they're in Rayleigh and they want to go to Castle Point?
Yeah, the question I asked was just where would you say the majority of your work is located? So it could be that the pickup is mainly at Southend and they drop off at Rochford, or it could be in Castle Point, but I'll go on to some other bits and pieces of information that were also passed on to me by the operators that will then actually help you get a little bit more information around that with the statistical information. Just to go back to one question that was around the school contract and the number of drivers that we have. We have 32 live school contract drivers at the present time, and we have 10 currently going through the application process to become school contract drivers. Okay, right. The next one I wanted to obviously just highlight to you was when the badges are likely to expire. I thought that was quite useful so you could actually see that over the next sort of few months when the badges are due to expire. As you can see, some were already in February, some were in March, and then it goes all the way through to September, with the majority of the badges that are due to expire in August. So that was the feedback that we had from the drivers from the survey. There was positive and there was negative in there, but what I wanted to do is just go through an example of one of the drivers that did go through the process, which is Glenn, and Glenn has said that he's happy for me to include all his details in the report. So Glenn started with the Knowledge School on the 22nd of February 2022. He went through the process and he was awarded his badge on the 10th of May 2022. So that was 2 months and 18 days after he started the course. That means that he had done all the DBS checks, all the safeguarding training, all the disability awareness, driving assessments. He had met all the requirements. The only thing he hadn't passed at that stage was the knowledge test. On the 28th of July 2022, Glenn came and took his knowledge test and he passed the first time. And he was then, we changed over his badge from a private hire driver's badge that same day over to a Hackney Carriage driver's badge. And he began working in a taxi the same day. So it's just to prove it can work. I asked Glenn for a bit of a comment as to why he felt that the scheme was right for him at that time in February. And I don't really need to go through the whole lot, but it's emphasised really that One, it's down to having a good tutor. And it says there, if the course wasn't on as a learn scheme, I wouldn't have started, and it had been organised extremely well and affordable. Being a taxi driver is completely different from working from the usual 9 to 5. You can become more flexible for family and still make time up at any point of that day or week. It's also been very financially. Personally, the scheme should continue, as it's an excellent trade to get into if you're willing to put the hours in. And again, that is the key bit for me that's really standing out. If you're willing to put the work in and to work hard, then you will get the rewards. And that has been evidence certainly from Glenn's experience. Then we go on to an operator. Again, I asked the operators for information to help me look at this in a bit more detail. How has it worked for the operators? And I ask you to look at this with a bit of caution. The reason for that is the operators have financially benefited quite considerably from the Earn As You Learn scheme. Because the drivers have to go and work for them, obviously they generate money from hiring of vehicles, of radio rent, and obviously you've got extra drivers out there, which is obviously extra income for the operators. So from an operator's point of view, yes, it has been a very successful scheme, but there is key points in the report and the perspective from the operator that is quite good to see. The strong, and again, you can read it, but it's the key point at the end. Lastly, thank you for all your support. It's truly refreshing and a pleasure working with you. We believe that you have a balanced view in the interest of all parties, the public, the drivers, and the circuit operators. I strongly recommend that this scheme remains in place. From the circuit perspective, this has been a major success, as without the support, our customers would have been stranded on the streets late at night as post-pandemic. We have lost drivers and ultimately coverage. So from an operator's point of view, they have seen an advantage to it. So I asked the operators for all their information, their bookings, in relation to the jobs that had been given to the Earn As You Learn drivers, and also the number of bookings that they had taken by their operator's license during that time period. And this is between July 22 and December 22. There was a question that has been put to me around how come that there is Andrews have got 25,000 sort of allocated bookings, whereas Best Tax have got 69,000. Andrews have got 2 operators bases, one that is in the Rochester district at Aviation Way, and one which is in Southend. So even though the call centre will take about the same amount of calls, they will split them equally between the Rochester and the Southend area. So where you've seen that Best Tax have taken a lot more jobs, it's just because that they've only got one base, which is based in Rayleigh, rather than spreading it over the 2 operators' bases that they have. But you can see that the percentage of work allocated out to the Earn As You Learn is very, very similar. You're looking at about 27, 28% of the work that they have dealt with has been dealt with by the Earn As You Learn drivers. Okay, and this then leads on to a real interesting bit. Like I say, in the actual main report, I'd put it as figures, but I thought it was actually quite helpful to see it as a map, to actually see, because I have to admit, I had to look up what the SS1 postcode was because I didn't actually know it. But looking at a map, it gave me a better understanding as to what areas that it covers. So what I've used here is, because there was lots of facts and figures and lots of bookings that they'd given me. So the chart that I've included is based on those figures that were provided to me between July 22 and December 22. And this shows the pickup locations, not the drop-offs. All the drop-off locations are inside the Rochester district. So I had to use either the pickup locations or the drop-off locations to get a postcode. I couldn't use both at the same time because it was going to skew the figures, because you're going to effectively count twice. So I used the pickup locations. The reason why I used the pickup locations is that the key points that has been highlighted by the drivers was that the majority of the work was in the Southend area. If the majority of the work is in the Southend area, that's where they're going to be picking up the drivers, picking up the passengers from. So it was vital for me to use the pickup information. With the information that's been provided to me, like I say, it gives me what the drop-offs have been within the Rochford district. I am not sure whether there may be some jobs, and this has come to light very recently, where the operator has allocated a earn as you learn driver to go and pick someone up from Southend and has also dropped off in Southend. It's come to my attention recently under a couple of complaints from Southend licensing that I've obviously investigated, and I have taken formal action over those. So I have got obviously the figures here. As you can see, with Andrews, 62% of the jobs is within the SS4 postcode, which is mainly the Rochford, Ashington, Canewdon, Stanbridge and Paglesham area. Whereas Best Tax, which is 63%, is in the SS6 postcode, which is Rayleigh, which is what I would normally expect from an operator that is mainly based in the Rayleigh area. I know there's going to be lots of questions around this. So, I then went on to around the public's perception. How have they received it since we've introduced the Earn as you learn scheme? And it wasn't coordinated by myself, but was coordinated by someone else, which made my life a little bit easier. On social media, there was a post in November 22, which was asking the questions around the taxi trade and how did they find the taxi trade and their experiences. And I've just picked out some key points that have been raised. In the main report, I've answered those concerns because I felt that we, as a committee, need to respond to certainly the comments that were being asked. And it was right that if we highlighted the questions and then the responses from us, then we can obviously feed that back to the residents in some form. So, one of the questions was, I've been informed that Rochford licences are more restrictive in restrictions to neighbouring boroughs like Southend, who are allowed to pick up fares outside the area. No, that's not true. With the work that we've been doing, we were the first council in Essex to introduce the Earn as you learn scheme. Only one other council is introducing it next week, which is Basildon. A lot of the councils are watching what we're doing, and we have both Karis and myself have had national interest in the scheme via the Private Hire Taxi magazine, but we've also had phone calls from other councils across the whole of the UK showing a real interest in the scheme. Bring back Uber would definitely make it more appealing to go out on an evening knowing how you can get a taxi home. I know that there was a conversation with Uber around whether they would be interested in obtaining a licence within the district. No, they are not interested in obtaining a licence within the district. As part of the Uber app, they have got part of the app that is known as a local taxi company, and one of our operators is one of those local taxi companies that is attached to the Uber app. I'll be interested to hear if there is any truth in the rumours that the local taxi firms have bought up all the licences and would only issue them to new drivers with the rental of the taxi firms' owned vehicles. No, again, we have licensed a number of vehicles for the Earn as you learn drivers that have used their own vehicles. There is no restriction over the number of licences that we issue for vehicles. Most councils are making it harder and harder for more and more expensive to get a driver's licence and basically earn minimum wage and often abuse whilst doing so. We haven't changed our fees since 2017. It is something that I need to urgently look at because of the costs of the equipment and the costs of running the team that we run, but it hasn't changed since 2017. The last one is the more worrying one. I've tried several companies for my 22 and 20-year-old to pre-book taxis for them on a night out so that they can get home. And each company is telling me on a Friday and Saturday night they don't take bookings. They just have to ring when they want to come home and hope for the best. That is concerning because the whole purpose of the scheme was to address certainly the Friday and Saturday nights. Okay. In there, I have also included a officer recommendation, and I've highlighted 2 bits in there. In the second paragraph and the final paragraph, officers are concerned that the high percentage of drivers will not pass the knowledge test within the 9-month period based on their responses of the driver's survey. However, it's evident from the case study that if a driver is willing to put in the work and work closely with the operator, they can achieve the full Hackney Carriage driver's badge within the allocated time. The licensing team are keen still to support the scheme, however, recommend that adjustments are made to the scheme, and what I propose or recommend is that actually limited the number of Energy Learn applicants per operator. What I've suggested is actually limiting it to 10 per operator. Once someone has either passed their knowledge test or they have completed the 9 months, that then opens up a gap to then fill that single slot. So it is a rolling allocation of 10 drivers that will be working for that operator at any one time. The reason why I've made this recommendation, I think that puts pressure on the operators as well to get the people through. If they want to have more drivers, they've got to work with the drivers to get them through their knowledge test quicker, which means that they can get more drivers out there. If they are just relying on them working for those 9 months, they're not going to increase the numbers that they want to do. Personally, I believe that one of the operators has worked very, very well, and we've seen that evidently wise with the number of pass rate in their drivers. 8 of the drivers that have passed out of the 9 is all from one operator. That is with the Best Tax operator. In relation to Andrews, and again, I think you can already see that from the figures and the attendance at the Knowledge School, they haven't had the same results that we have seen certainly over the last 12 months. This way, I think it sort of forces their hands a little bit. I know, Joe, you're going to ask me questions. Right, that actually does lead me on nicely to any questions.
Right.
Sorry, there was a lot of information.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. Right, members, okay, I know there's going to be lots and lots of questions. I think it might be an idea to ask whatever questions you need to make a decision about whether or not you want the scheme to continue. And then if you decide that you want the scheme to continue, then we can start talking about recommendations, because I've certainly got some, and I'm sure you have as well. Does that sound about fair? I think it's probably a good way to go. So, again, I didn't see hands going up, so I'm going to start. Well, you're sitting right in front of me, Councillor Efty. Councillor Efty.
Thank you. With the 40 new drivers, 10 each operator, at the moment we've only got 2 operators, I'm correct, actually taking this on board. Would that encourage the other 2 operators to take this on, or would it just be 20 drivers lost?
No, I have spoken to both of the operators. Cab 24/7, which was previously based in Rayleigh, have just merged with the cooperative in Southend, and they are keen to do extra work within the Rayleigh area under the correct rules of operating solely in the Rayleigh area. So they are keen to. They were waiting, obviously, for today's decision as to whether the scheme was going to continue or not, but they are eager to bring drivers on. The other one, which is Alpine, again, I spoke to the operator. There has been some issues with his family, and so he hasn't been able to focus as much as trying to increase the number of drivers in the area. But again, he is very keen to get that moving forward, and I've had an email from him that he would be very supportive of the scheme and also limiting the numbers to 10.
Thank you.
Councillor Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, to be honest, Chairman, I'm quite happy to propose that we go to the vote and then talk about the nuts and bolts.
Okay. So, members, I think what we'll do then, in that case, then we'll take a vote on whether or not we want to keep the Earn As You Learn scheme. and then we can decide what we can do with it afterwards. So that proposition is made by Councillor Mr McPherson and seconded by Councillor Mr Mason. Is that correct? Obviously, well, yes, subject to amendments. Okay, so members, you've heard the proposition. All those in favour of the proposition, please signify. It's unanimous. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you, members. Okay, so now we've decided that we're going to keep the scheme, which is not surprising. Let's talk about what amendments, if any, we wish to make to it. So, did you finish what you wanted to say, Councillor Mr McPherson?
I would like to ask now some questions that can formulate some of our recommendations.
Okay, sure. Carry
on. My first question is, Best Tax has obviously done very well with this project and the way we would like to see it go forward. I'm a little bit concerned that we would perhaps then penalise them, that it is a 10 per operator option, whereas should we not be almost not rewarding, but this operator has done good practice, could they not be offered more?
I, funny enough, had an email from the operator asking that exact question. My logic behind it is that at the moment they have got an excellent selling point for getting drivers on board. That part of their uniqueness is the percentage that they've managed to get through the knowledge school test and pass. With them going through, they, as you can see from the figures, I think they've had 18 drivers over the last 12 months. If they stick to the same sort of principles of what they've had with 8 that have passed, that effectively will open up the option for the original 10. And if they keep on the same process, then effectively another 8 as part of the same. So it'll be effectively the same as what they've got now. So I felt that this was a balanced approach, that everyone was being treated the same. But it was clearly evident that they will achieve more than the other operators. Does that answer your question? Not really.
Thank you. It does, through you, Chair, it does answer the question. My only, and I would not start to think how we could fit this into recommendation, but the fact that if they've done so well, should they not, it almost be a question of how many do you feel that you can take that you will successfully get a high percentage through the knowledge test?
Do you feel that's confident? Do you feel, I mean, you know the industry better than we do. Do you feel confident they could be reasonable rather than try and swallow more than they can actually deal with?
Yes, but my concern is I'm trying to keep a level balance with all the operators on a level playing field. We have to obviously stay neutral to not show favouritism towards one operator than another, and I would just hate to be in a position that we get challenged. Like I say, if by limiting it all to 10, or it may be that we actually up that number, it may not be 10, you might want to choose a higher number than that. But I felt that 10 was quite a good number because it focused the knowledge school that they could then focus purely on 10 people at any one time. But then was still sufficient enough that, bear in mind, we've had it literally open for unlimited numbers, and one operator's had 21, one's had 18. You're looking at the similar sort of numbers for next year. Then it is achievable to keep the similar sort of numbers. But I'll be guided by you, really. But yes, obviously the operators are going to want more numbers.
And just finally, Chairman, and I'll leave it for somebody else to perhaps formulate a recommendation, but could you clarify again what it is that Best Tax has done so well? Because perhaps what they've done well, we can put into our recommendations going forward.
Yeah, I'm going to draw you really to 6.10 on the report, page 6.9. It actually outlines the percentage of attendance at their knowledge school. And it is very evident as part of the agreement to work for Best Tax is that they have to attend a knowledge school at least once a week. That is very evident.
Thank you. I think, Chairman, we've got a recommendation already there then that drivers on this scheme have to attend Knowledge School once a week.
What I'll do is I'll start adding these and then we can discuss them at the end. But,
Thank you.
just while I'm writing that down, Councillor Williams just wants to say something.
And I would need a seconder for that anyway.
So, just confirm what it is again, please, Councillor Mason.
No, that's Mrs McPherson.
What did I say?
Mason.
Somebody's got it.
I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, thank you. I presume the fact that if we limit these numbers to 10, this is going to encourage the schools or the companies to get them through as quickly as possible, so that it opens up for more.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I say, as soon as they pass their knowledge test, that effectively opens up that slot that they can then recruit another person in to replace that person that was previously on the knowledge.
So 10 or 12 would be probably.
So it's a constant 10 as part of their knowledge school.
Yeah.
The other reason why I wanted 10 as well is that we have to be mindful as well around our existing drivers. The last thing we want to do is to lose our existing drivers that we have out there as well. I think by limiting the numbers, and our existing trade know that they are limited to only 40, that still allows them the scope to have some work as well.
Thank you, Steve. Before we go any further, Councillor Mrs McPherson, you obviously proposed in that recommendation. What we'll do is we'll vote at the end. Did you have a seconder? Councillor Mrs Mason, yeah? Councillor Mrs Mason. Councillor Mrs Mason, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to support that proposal and come back on a few other points as well. The numbers, I think, is a good idea. We have to be seen to be fair, and I don't think we can, however much we think that one operator is performing better, they will automatically be rewarded by getting their drivers through the knowledge and therefore getting more drivers on the circuit. So it's a rewarding scheme, and I certainly would recommend that agree with the recommendation that it's 10 for all. The point that, and I have raised this, that I am more concerned about is that it says very clearly in the report on, I think it's 6.2, that they can only operate in Rochford. On 6.6, it shows clearly that they're not. They're going to Lee, Hadley, Castle Point, Southend. Now, this is a very good scheme, and Rochford Council has been very innovative and very forward-looking, and I think all thanks to the officer for this, in implementing this, and it's done wonders for our residents. We still have a long way to go, but we have a good scheme. What we shouldn't be doing is disadvantaging our residents by advantaging other people from other districts that haven't had the foresight to do such a scheme. So I know that their pickup points, I would want to see that the pickup points are restricted to the Rochford district area and not Lee, Castle, etc. Because someone from Southend might be coming into our area, admittedly, for an evening out, but they can use a Southend taxi. They've got more taxis. But our residents are still having problems. I'm still having residents complain, not so much, admittedly, that they can't book taxis, which is a concern that we have. If you can't book a taxi for a vulnerable person and it prevents them going out at night, or it means that they don't go out, or the taxi doesn't turn up, we still have that problem. So we need to focus very much on our area. So I would like to say that the restriction is enforced, that they can only pick up in the Rochford district area, and I'd like to propose that. Thank you, Joe, thank you. And second, so for noting, I'm sure Sonia will word it better than I. And secondly, the knowledge. I think we've all heard and seen in the charts the difference that the knowledge has made and how it's, and I would like attendance at those knowledge schools to be compulsory. I don't think we can say compulsory for 100% because people do get ill, they do have holidays, but I think we should put a percentage on it, a high percentage, perhaps 70. I'm not particularly fussed. So I would also like to suggest that we have a percentage put on the attendance of the schools in order for them to carry on with the scheme. So if they fall below that amount, that level, that they come off of it. I don't know if that's manageable, and I'd like the officer to let me know if that would be practical and manageable. Thank you.
In response to the question, yes, we can work very closely with the operators, and it can be a requirement as part of the, we can put it under, rather than as Earn As You Learn, but a operator approval scheme, that they are a approved operator to run the scheme on our behalf. And we could stipulate that in there, that they must tend at least a certain percentage of the knowledge school. If they don't, then we'll suspend their driver's badges, and that will then be suspended until the expiry date of the badge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Steve. If the other members are inclined to agree with that, I'd like to propose it. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We seem to be coming up with different proposals. Are we not going to vote on the first proposal?
No, we've decided, we've already voted to decide we want to keep the scheme. Now we're looking at what we want. So what we're going to do is, we're not voting on anything at the moment now. There's already a number of recommendations on the table from the office. So what we'll do is let's get some recommendations together and we'll vote for them. If members wish to vote individually, then I'll do that, but hopefully we can vote en masse.
Okay. Right, I understand. The question I was going to ask was to Stephen Greener, and he did elaborate on the rationale behind restricting each operator to 10, so I understand that. I was going to make a proposal that rather than restrict each operator to 10 on a rolling basis, we have a cap on the overall number, because it's clear that some operators are less willing to take up the scheme than others. Andrews and Best Tax obviously are very keen with the scheme, and I think to restrict them to 10 at a time is unfair on them. If we had an overall cap of, say, 40 or 50 running, then the greater proportion can be taken up by the two that are sort of leading the way. So that's what I'd like to propose.
It sounds like you're sort of trying to propose an amendment to a recommendation that's already been made, if that makes sense, because isn't there a recommendation that there should be an increase for each operator, but now you're saying there should be, I think what you're saying is there should be a cap on total, and operators fight for what they want in between.
Kind of, yeah, an overall cap, and then because clearly Alpine and the 24/7, they've not, really taken up the scheme at all. Best Tax and Andrews are really running with it and making a success of it. So I'd rather see an overall cap to the number rather than a restriction for each operator. Do I need to make that a proposal, or is that a counter proposal? I don't really know the protocol here, but I would like to propose that we have an overall cap rather than individual operator caps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's a rolling figure, so I'm not quite sure.
I know there's been discussion about, because I know the question was asked by yourself, Councillor Mrs McPherson, about whether or not the operator should be restricted to 10. I've been corrected, I mistakenly thought there'd been a recommendation to increase that, but there hasn't, so that is still on the table. But there's, 10, that means if there's only 10, if there's only 2 companies that take it up, that means that there's only, let me make a note of your names, and I will come to you because I'm still trying to work through my list. Then it means that, if there's only 2 companies to take it up, then we're only going to end up with 20 licenses, aren't we? Right, okay. Councillor Lambourne.
Yes, following up on Councillor Cross's point, surely it should be an overall figure, and then the allocation to the operators should be in proportion to the number of cabs they're running on their circuit. So if we have a cap of 40, and Andrews and Best Tax are the 2 biggest operators, they therefore deserve more. Otherwise, you're giving a commercial benefit to the smaller operators.
Okay, I think let's have a recommendation.
That's my first point.
Yeah, are you making a recommendation, Councillor Lambert? Was that the same recommendation that Councillor Cross is making?
It was an amendment to his in that it should be in proportion to the number of cabs they've got in the circuit.
We're going to end up with too many recommendations here if we're not careful, aren't we?
Right, we just need one recommendation around an overall figure, please.
And I had a point about the pickup point.
Okay. Before you go any further, let's deal with Councillor Cross's recommendation. Councillor Cross, your recommendation is, just remind us again, and have you got a seconder for your recommendation?
Not to my knowledge.
Just repeat it, maybe you will.
Oh, I have, okay. Right, well, the recommendation is to, rather than restrict each operating company to 10 at any one time on a rolling basis, accept that, we have a rolling 40 cap overall, and it's kind of a first come, first serve basis, I guess, on how that allocation is split. Whether that's workable or not, I'm not sure. But
okay. Is that a workable scheme? Yep. It is. Okay. Are you happy with you've got what you said? Right. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Cross? Councillor Stanley. Okay. We'll add that to the list of recommendations discussed at the end. Okay. Councillor Lambourne, you hadn't finished.
Yes, I think it was Councillor Mrs Mason who said that the pick-up point must be in Rochford district. I don't think that's workable because if I'm going to Southend from Rayleigh, I will get a cab, and then when I get there, I will say to the cabbie, "Can you pick me up at 10:30?" So his pick-up point on the way back, he starts in Southend, but he's bringing me back to Rochford. So I would like to amend that to be one of the either the pick-up or the drop-off. Either or is in Rochford. Thank you.
You can't amend its recommendation. It's already there, isn't it? I think at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, there's already a recommendation on the table, and if you don't support it, then don't support it. And I think that's where we need to go.
Chairman, I was just going to. Can I just point out that the cabbie can't.
You're next, actually, on my list, Chris. So.
Thank you very much. But I don't believe the cabbie can actually make that appointment. It's only if you phone through to the office that he can pick you up. Is that correct? Thank you.
You did have your hand up, Councillor Stanley. Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to say? Sorry.
In relation to what I wanted to ask was making the stipulation that only to pick up in Rochford or Rayleigh, as has already been asked. Aren't we closing down the area to the cab driver who is on this Earn As You Learn scheme, in as much as you've just reduced his finances drastically to pick up in Southend, and also the Earn As You Learn scheme. I think that it needs to. I need to know basically, is the pass mark 100%, or is the pass mark, what is the pass mark?
Sorry, what are you talking about now? The knowledge test, are you?
The knowledge, yes, sorry, the knowledge test, yeah. Is there a leeway on that knowledge test in as much as what percentage is the pass mark? Because I feel that from what I could see from what we've just been told, it could be that, you know, with hindsight, we're maybe asking a little bit too much. I don't know. I mean, some drivers will get through the pass. I mean, I've had to go through several tests in my knowledge of electrical engineering. So, but we've had a pass mark, if you like, a percentage. So, is that the same conditions?
Okay, I'll try and answer this as easy as possible because it's not as easy as you think. Right, the knowledge test, just to do a very, very quick summary. 56 questions on the computer in 35 minutes. They are broken down by sections. They are broken down by roads. I'm sure Karis will tell me if I've got this wrong. The roads, so a number of the questions will ask what's at either end of each road. The next bit that we have is around the routes. It will give you, ask you a route. So, for example, it will be from Rayleigh railway station to Rochford railway station. It's multiple choice. All these questions are all multiple choice. One of the routes will say go up at the top of Crown Hill, turn left. One will say go up at the top of Crown Hill, turn right. And you then have to work out what is the correct route to then go to the second location. After that, it's then places of interest. And normally we're places that people would get out of, leave the railway station and say, right, take me to the nearest bowling alley. If anyone knows, it's at Eldon Way in Hockley. So it's those sort of questions that are in the actual test. And then after that, it is the highway code code signage, and then it's finally on our conditions. So there's six sections. They are allowed to get one question wrong in each of those sections, apart from the conditions where they're allowed two. So it is very, very hard. If they pass all of the sections apart from two, but they're close, they're like 1 or 2 points out, we take the liberty of saying to those applicants, right, you resit those two sections again while we're sitting here. If you pass them, we'll pass it. If you don't, then you have to come back again to retake the test. So we try and do a diplomatic approach. It is stressful. They shake in the knowledge test because they do worry about it. It's a lot to learn and it's a lot of pressure. So like I say, that's why if they are out by only one section or they're out by a couple, we do ask them to retake those bits. We have also done it if they are not computer literate. We have verbally done the test as well. We take the time off the test and we verbally ask them the questions. So we are able to adapt it slightly, depending on the needs and what we identify. We are keen to obviously get the drivers through, but they must meet those requirements. Is that right?
Councillor Mrs. Shaw.
No, it's been answered, thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mrs. McPherson.
Chairman, just want to come back and amend my original amendment to incorporate Councillor Mrs. Mason's, because it makes sense. Mine was that they do the weekly knowledge training, and Councillor Mrs. Mason's was that has at least, I believe, 70% attendance. So that can be amalgamated as one recommendation. I then believe, because I'm losing track of some of the, that the only other recommendation on the table at the moment is that all pickups must be in the Rochford district, because that complies with this scheme and the legalities of it. Just one last thing, and I don't think this would be a recommendation, Chairman, but as it's been pointed out, our officers and this council are leading on this. And I think that we need to make sure that there is a lot of publicity around this, especially when they showed us some of the comments from our residents, so that we can give them reassurance of exactly what we're doing to try to support our residents in the scheme and provide a good service. Thank you, Chairman.
Do you like a good news story, don't you? I do. Can I, just before you hand the microphone over, I just need to make sure that Son is happy with what you're recommending here.
So are you recommending that the Earnest You Learn drivers should attend the Knowledge School once a week, and that attendance at the Knowledge School should be compulsory, and if it falls below 70%, then they're removed from the scheme?
We're both nodding. That is perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has been spoken about the drivers leaving the Rochford Council, but at the end of the day, this scheme was brought in by Rochford Council for the residents of Rochford, and if the drivers want to earn more money by going to Southend, they need to pass the test to get through the course and finish it. So they shouldn't be allowed to go anywhere else.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Councillor Efty.
I was just going to ask, with the drop-off and pick-up, is that workable for drivers? Would that really cut their income if they can't pick up from Southend and drop in Rochford?
No, I think that it will focus the Earn As You Learn drivers a bit more. Certainly from the complaints that I've had recently is that the drivers, once they have done a drop-off in Southend, that they've then stayed in Southend to then pick up their next job within the Southend area and not returned back to the district. I think if you introduce the requirement that the operators can only pass jobs to Earn As You Learn drivers that are the Rochford postcodes, that then forces the drivers back into the Rochford district again, which will encourage them to be in the district, learning the roads. They can still drive around the roads while they're waiting for jobs to be allocated.
Does any other member wish to ask any questions or speak? Councillor Stanley.
I've got to ask, now, this might be a little bit off the cuff. You know what I mean? Does this interfere with the human rights of the drivers in as much as you are restricting what their services will provide?
No, I think we are doing it as a accredited operator scheme, that it is the operator that we have asked to coordinate this scheme on our behalf. If they don't want to operate under the scheme, then we're not forcing them to do that. But obviously that will make it more difficult for them to recruit drivers.
You can see where I'm coming from. I don't want to see us sort of being sort of judgmental in what we can do and what we can't do. There is a law that says everybody's got a freedom of job, whatever they do. And I don't want to see that we're restricting it. At the same time, and you probably think I'm going off tack here, but yeah, if we was to turn around and say that, could we turn around and say that they can only pick up fares at Rochford and have to return to Rochford to pick up fares? That's what I'm asking. Instead of saying that they can only that they have to work in Rochford.
Can I just intervene at this point?
Sorry.
Because I think we've already, and please correct me if I have this wrong, the recommendation on the table has already been shown that we can do it and it is lawful. So, and I think what you're suggesting is actually contrary to that, which I don't have an issue with, but I think what we'll do is vote on the recommendation. If it fails, then maybe you could put that forward as an alternative. Is that acceptable? Okay. Any other member wish to speak? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll take the recommendations, the member recommendations first. Yep. In fact, let's read them out and then we'll see. Do you want to read them? Use your handwriting.
Right. Whoops. Okay, so the recommendation 1 is that Earn As You Learn drivers should attend the Knowledge School once a week. Attendance at the Knowledge School should be compulsory, and if it falls below 70%, then they're removed from the scheme. Okay. Recommendation 2 is that the restriction should be enforced that Earn As You Learn pickups should be within the Rochford district. And then the final one is that rather than restrict each operator to 10 Earn As You Learn badges at any one time, that there should be an overall cap of 40 badges determined on a first come, first served basis.
No, hang on, members. Those were the 3 recommendations. So I guess from the reaction, my next question was going to be, are you happy to take those en masse? And I suggest the answer is no. Fine. Okay, we'll take them separately then. So the first recommendation we'll take.
So I'll read out recommendation. I'll read out the first recommendation and then we'll take a vote on that first of all. So Earn As You Learn. So basically, the third one will, but we're going to have to vote on that first, Councillor Williams. Okay. So recommendation 1, therefore, Earn As You Learn drivers should attend Knowledge School once a week. Attendance at the Knowledge School should be compulsory, and if it falls below 70%, then they're removed from the scheme.
Okay, members, all those in favour of that recommendation, please raise your hand.
That is unanimous.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, members. Second recommendation.
Recommendation 1 agreed. So recommendation 2 is that the restriction should be enforced that Earn As You Learn pickups should be within the Rochford district.
Okay, members, all those in favour, please raise your hands.
So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, thank you, members. Those against? And any abstentions? I don't think there are there? No.
So that's carried.
Okay, so that recommendation is carried 7, 4 and 3 against.
Okay, and then the final one. So rather than restrict each operator to 10 Earn As You Learn badges at any one time, there should be an overall cap of 40 determined on a first-come, first-served basis.
Members, those in favour of that recommendation, please raise your hands. Okay, those against? And abstentions? Okay, so that recommendation has lost 2, 4, 7 against and 1 abstention. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. In that case, may I propose that the officers, as the officers recommend, that each of the 4 main operators are allocated 10 Earn As You Learn spaces under an operated... Try again. The officers recommend that each of the 4 main operators are allocated 10 Earn As You Learn spaces under an operator development scheme once a driver has passed their knowledge test or completed the 9-month period. The slot is made available to the operator to hire another applicant.
Okay, so that's an officer recommendation proposed. Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Various. Councillor McPherson. Okay, members, all those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Those against?
1, 2, 3.
And abstentions? Shouldn't be any. Okay, that recommendation is passed.
Okay.
Are there any others?
Yes.
There are. Where is this thing?
There is one more. Is there one more recommendation?
No, I don't think there is there?
Hold on, we're over there. So no more officer recommendation for you,
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, as we have slightly altered the scheme, whether this committee would want to review it in, say, 6 months or 9 months' time to see if it's improving the service for our residents.
That sounds like a recommendation to me.
So can we clarify the period?
Yeah, just clarify 6 months, did you say,
I think
or 12 months?
last time we were doing 12 months, but because we have slightly altered the scheme, and I'll take the officer's advice on this, would it be helpful to review it in 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months? I'm not very fussy about the time, but I just think we want to be very careful to keep it reviewed and make sure that it is fit for purpose and it is serving our residents as we wish it to.
What do you think would be the best time scale?
I would say 9 months would be a good review date, because certainly that we would have had the old drivers are under the old scheme that we obviously now have to bring back into line with the new requirements, and also we would have then had the new people that would be coming on the scheme from scratch, because we obviously need to bring everyone all in line with the same sort of conditions. So I'd say 9 months would be a good time for a review. That'll bring it up until December.
Then can I make that a formal recommendation, please?
For
Mr.
9
Chairman?
months, yeah?
For 9 months, yes.
Do you have a
thank
seconder? Pick one. Were you indicating that you wanted a second, or do you want to speak? I was going to second. Get a second, okay, thank Members, so the final recommendation is that we have a review of the Earn As You Learn scheme in a 9-month period. So those in favour? Any against? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, hands up again, hands up again.
Okay, I think it's 9, isn't it? Yeah.
Any against? Any abstentions?
Yeah. So that's carried 9.
That's carried 9-4 and 1 abstention. So that concludes this item, and that's it, isn't it?
Yeah. Chairman? Hold on.
No,
No.
you've dealt with it.
Yeah.
Chairman, I don't know if I said that apologies to Councillor Mrs Belton. I don't know if you...
I didn't hear that, but thank you, Councillor Mrs Shaw. We'll make sure it's noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, members, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening.